4:17 in the morning. The radar station outside Ramstein picks up something it shouldn't, a blip moving at Mach 7 over the Baltic. The duty officer leans closer to the screen. His hand hovers over the secure line. For 6 seconds he does nothing. He recalculates. He checks again. The blip doesn't disappear. It multiplies. 3 more signatures appear over Belarus, then 5 more over the Black Sea. His hand moves. The phone rings in Brussels, then London, then Washington. Within 90 seconds, the word goes out. Launch detected. Multiple inbounds. Time to impact 11 minutes. In those 11 minutes, the world doesn't end. It fractures, and the cracks spread faster than anyone can run. This is not speculation dressed as fiction. This is the mechanical reality of what happens when deterrence fails and the unthinkable becomes operational. The first nuclear detonation over Europe in wartime triggers a sequence that no treaty, no hotline, and no amount of goodwill can reverse. The systems that hold modern life together, power grids, communication networks, supply chains, trust itself, begin collapsing before the second warhead even detonates. And the people caught inside this collapse, the ones who thought it could never happen, discover that survival is not about luck. It is about decisions made in the first 60 seconds after the sirens start. As the missile arcs over Poland and the countdown ticks toward 0, the question is no longer whether this could happen. The question is where you will be when it does. The first strike hits a NATO airbase in eastern Poland. The warhead is tactical, 20 kilotons, designed to destroy hardened targets without flattening entire cities. It detonates 300 meters above the runway. The flash is brighter than the sun. The fireball expands outward at 600 miles per hour. The shockwave levels hangars, control towers, and aircraft on the tarmac. The electromagnetic pulse fries unshielded electronics within a 12-mile radius. Communication links to Brussels go dark. Backup systems kick in, but they are slower. Satellite feeds show the thermal bloom. Seismic sensors confirm ground shock. The radar picture fills with debris. For 4 minutes, no one knows if this is the only strike or the first of 100. The European public knows nothing yet. In Warsaw, people are asleep. In Berlin, the first commuters board trains. In Paris, bakeries open. The news cycle is still focused on yesterday's political crisis. Then the alerts begin. Not everywhere at once. Not with clarity. In Poland, emergency broadcast messages interrupt radio and television. The wording is vague. An incident near the border. Seek shelter. Await further instructions. In Germany, air raid sirens activate in cities near military installations. The sound is unfamiliar. Many people assume it is a malfunction or a drill. In the Baltics, where the memory of Soviet occupation still lingers, the reaction is immediate. Schools lock down. Highways fill with cars heading west. The Polish government moves leadership to hardened bunkers outside Warsaw. The German cabinet convenes in a secure facility under Berlin. France raises its nuclear alert posture. NATO activates Article 4, not Article 5. Not yet. Because confirming nuclear use means deciding on a response. And that decision has to be unanimous, and unanimous takes time. In the first 20 minutes, the information fog is total. Social media explodes with speculation. Videos of the flash appear online, filmed from dash cams 100 kilometers away. Some are real. Most are old footage from weapons tests or volcano eruptions, reposted as breaking news. Rumors spread that Moscow has been hit, that London is next, that submarines have launched. None of it is verified. None of it can be dismissed. The platforms try to moderate, but the volume is too high. Algorithms prioritize engagement, and fear engages. Within an hour, the top trending posts are contradictory, apocalyptic, and impossible to trace. Governments issue statements urging calm. They tell people to stay indoors, avoid travel, and rely on official channels. But the official channels are slow. The press conferences are careful. The language is diplomatic. And the gap between what leaders know and what they say feeds the panic. The immediate blast zone is a circle of annihilation. Everything within 2 kilometers of ground zero is vaporized or flattened. The base ceases to exist. The personnel stationed there are gone. The surrounding towns suffer catastrophic damage. Buildings collapse, fires ignite. The injured outnumber the ambulances by hundreds to one. Hospitals in Lublin and Rzeszów prepare for mass casualties, but the roads are clogged. Emergency services cannot reach the worst zones. Survivors stumble out of rubble with burns, lacerations and radiation exposure they cannot see or feel yet. The fallout begins within minutes. The ground burst pulls soil and debris into the mushroom cloud. Radioactive particles rise, cool, and begin to fall downwind. The wind is blowing east to west at 15 kilometers per hour. The plume stretches across central Poland toward Germany. Radiation detectors in Wrocław and Prague register elevated levels. Not lethal yet, but rising. The Polish government orders evacuations in a corridor 50 kilometers downwind of the blast, but the order is impossible to execute. The roads are already jammed. Fuel stations run dry within 2 hours. People abandon cars and walk. Families split up in the confusion. Children are separated from parents. The elderly cannot keep pace. Panic turns movement into chaos. Some head toward Germany, hoping for safety across the border. But Germany closes the crossings. Not to block refugees, but to prevent contamination from spreading unchecked. The closure is announced as temporary. It is not lifted for weeks. In the affected zones, those who cannot leave retreat indoors. They seal windows with tape and towels. They fill bathtubs with water before the pressure drops. They listen to radios and wait for instructions that are too slow and too general. The official advice is to shelter for at least 24 hours. But many have no food, no medicine. No way to know if the radiation outside is lethal or manageable. By hour 6, the secondary effects are radiating outward. The power grid across Poland destabilizes. The EMP damaged substations near the blast. Emergency shutdowns ripple through the network to prevent cascading failures. Rolling blackouts hit Warsaw, Kraków and Gdansk. Germany's grid, interconnected with Poland's, suffers voltage swings. Grid operators isolate problem areas, but the fixes take hours. In France, nuclear reactors enter safe mode as a precaution. The loss of baseload power forces utilities to fire up reserve plants. But reserve capacity was not designed for this. Prices spike. Industrial users are cut off. Hospitals switch to generators. The first deaths from power loss are not dramatic. They are quiet. Dialysis patients whose machines stop. Ventilator-dependent patients in under-resourced clinics. Insulin that spoils when refrigeration fails. These deaths do not make headlines because the headlines are full of the blast. Communication networks collapse under load. Everyone tries to call or text at once. The towers cannot handle the traffic. Calls drop. Messages delay for hours. The internet slows to a crawl in affected regions. Social media becomes the only source of information for millions, and it is flooded with misinformation. Fake evacuation maps circulate. Rumors claim that a second strike is inbound, that NATO has retaliated, that Moscow is destroyed. None of it is true, but the correction never catches up to the lie. Families lose contact with each other. Parents cannot reach children. Migrants trying to flee have no way to coordinate. The silence is worse than the noise. Not knowing becomes its own crisis. In Brussels, NATO convenes an emergency session. The question is simple and impossible. How do you respond to a nuclear strike without triggering full-scale nuclear war? The options are limited. A conventional retaliation against Russian launch sites and command nodes. A proportional nuclear response, matching the yield and target type to signal restraint and resolve. Or a pause, using back channels to demand an explanation and a halt before the next step. The problem is time. Intelligence suggests that Russian mobile launchers are repositioning. Whether for defense or preparation for a follow-up strike, no one can say for certain. The consensus is fragile. Some members push for immediate conventional strikes to degrade Russia's ability to launch again. Others warn that any strike, even non-nuclear, could be misread as the precursor to a larger attack. The decision is delayed. Minutes stretch into hours, and in that window, the uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. Because both sides are now operating in the dark, watching for signals, and interpreting every radar blip as a potential threat. The United States moves carrier groups closer to European waters. B-2 bombers are placed on alert. Submarine-launched ballistic missile platforms reposition quietly beneath the Arctic ice. The White House issues a statement condemning the attack and reaffirming the NATO alliance. The language is firm but not specific. No mention of retaliation, no ultimatum. The ambiguity is intentional. The goal is to leave options open while signaling resolve. But ambiguity also leaves adversaries guessing, and in a nuclear crisis, guessing is dangerous. The Russian government, through back channels, claims the strike was a miscalculation, that the target was legitimate but the weapon choice was unauthorized, that the officer responsible has been detained. Whether this is true or a cover story designed to buy time, no one knows. The claim is neither accepted nor dismissed. It is noted, verified where possible, and weighed against the possibility of deception. By the end of the first day, the blast zone is cordoned off. Military units in protective gear establish perimeter checkpoints. No one enters without authorization. No one leaves without decontamination. The injured are triaged in field hospitals set up outside the fallout zone. The supplies are inadequate. Burn treatments run out. Morphine is rationed. The medical staff work without rest. Some collapse from exhaustion. Others are exposed to radiation while treating the contaminated. The death toll climbs, but the count is imprecise. Bodies in the rubble cannot be recovered safely. The missing are assumed dead. Families wait for confirmation that never comes. Funeral rites are postponed. Burial becomes a logistics problem. The scale exceeds the capacity of every morgue within 200 kilometers. Mass graves are prepared. The images do not appear in the press. Governments suppress them, fearing that the visual evidence of such horror would deepen the panic. But the suppression fails. Witnesses film on phones, the footage leaks, and the world sees. In the unaffected zones, life fractures. Supermarkets are emptied within hours. Not because supply chains have collapsed yet, but because fear drives hoarding. Bread, water, canned goods, batteries, and medicine disappear from shelves. Fights break out over the last gallons of bottled water. Store employees quit and go home to their families. Resupply trucks are delayed because drivers refuse to enter areas near the fallout plume. Fuel stations impose limits, 5 liters per customer, but even that runs out by nightfall. Cash becomes king. ATMs are drained. Card readers malfunction when the network is unstable. People who relied entirely on digital payment find themselves unable to buy anything. Bartering begins in some neighborhoods. A can of formula for a flashlight, a pack of batteries for a blanket. The informal economy that emerges is not romantic. It is desperate. Crime surges in cities far from the blast. Looting begins in commercial districts. Police are spread thin, focused on critical infrastructure and evacuation routes. Some officers do not report for duty. They stay home with their families. The ones who remain are overwhelmed. In some areas, civilian militias form. Neighbors band together to guard streets and supplies. The line between protection and vigilantism blurs. Checkpoints appear at intersections, manned by armed residents who decide who passes and who does not. Violence escalates. Misunderstandings turn deadly. A driver who refuses to stop is shot. A looter caught stealing food is beaten. The social contract, already strained, snaps in places. Trust erodes. Strangers are threats. Cooperation becomes conditional. The financial markets freeze. Trading is halted on exchanges across Europe. Stock prices, frozen mid-collapse, reflect the moment investors realize that nuclear war is not a theoretical risk. Energy prices spike. Oil and natural gas futures double overnight. Countries with strategic reserves debate whether to release them. Some do, others hold back, fearing that the crisis will deepen and the reserves will be needed later. Shipping companies suspend routes through the Baltic and Black Sea. Insurance underwriters refuse to cover vessels in contested waters. Ports from Hamburg to Rotterdam slow to a fraction of normal capacity. Container ships anchor offshore, waiting for clarity that does not come. The cargo they carry, everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals to grain, sits immobile while the demand onshore grows desperate. By day 2, the second-order effects become visible. Food distribution networks seize. Not because there is no food, but because the logistics are broken. Trucks cannot refuel. Drivers cannot reach warehouses. Warehouses cannot coordinate delivery without functioning communication. Supermarkets that were emptied on day 1 are not restocked on day 2. Hunger begins, not in the blast zone, but in cities 1,000 kilometers away. Governments announce rationing plans. Coupons are issued. Distribution centers open in schools and municipal buildings. The lines are hours long. Families wait in the cold. The supplies are inconsistent. One center has rice but no oil. Another has canned vegetables but no protein. Malnutrition does not appear immediately, but the trajectory is set. Water becomes the next crisis. In rural areas with well systems, life continues almost normally. In cities dependent on centralized treatment and pumping, the power outages cripple supply. When electricity is restored intermittently, the pressure is weak. Boil water advisories are issued, but boiling requires fuel, and fuel is scarce. Bottled water, already hoarded, becomes a black market commodity. A case that cost €5 on day 0 sells for €50 on day 2. People without cash trade valuables, jewelry for water, electronics for food. The desperation is visible in faces, the exhaustion, the fear, the realization that the systems they took for granted are not coming back soon. Refugee flows intensify. Millions move west from Poland, the Baltics, and Ukraine. They travel by foot, bicycle, car, and train where trains still run. The border crossings into Germany, Czech Republic, and Austria are overwhelmed. Processing slows to a crawl. People wait in camps that lack sanitation, heating, and medical care. Children fall ill. The elderly die in the cold. The host countries try to manage the influx, but the resources are finite. Tensions rise. Nationalist movements push back. Protests demand border closures. Clashes erupt between refugees and locals. Governments impose emergency measures, curfews, movement restrictions, checkpoints. The rhetoric hardens. The language shifts from humanitarian aid to security threat. And the people fleeing for their lives find themselves trapped between the fallout behind them and the barricades ahead. By day 3, the psychological toll is undeniable. Sleep deprivation becomes universal. The constant alerts, the noise, the uncertainty, all of it prevents rest. People make irrational decisions. They leave shelter too early. They trust unreliable sources. They pick fights over trivial things. Domestic violence spikes. Substance abuse increases. Mental health hotlines are flooded with calls. Suicide rates climb. The trauma is compounded by isolation. Families separated by borders or evacuation cannot reunite. The lack of closure, not knowing if loved ones are alive or dead, gnaws at sanity. Grief is postponed. Mourning is a luxury no one can afford yet. The geopolitical situation remains frozen. NATO has not retaliated with nuclear weapons, but conventional strikes have begun. Precision munitions target Russian air defense systems, command bunkers, and missile launch sites. The strikes are carefully calibrated to avoid civilian casualties and minimize the risk of escalation. But the risk is still there. Every missile fired is tracked. Every explosion is analyzed. Both sides are one misinterpretation away from the next step. Back-channel negotiations continue. Mediators from neutral countries shuttle between capitals. The demands are clear: immediate ceasefire, withdrawal of forces, international inspections. But the trust required to verify compliance does not exist, and without trust the ceasefire is fragile. It holds not because the conflict is resolved, but because both sides are terrified of what comes next. In the blast zone, the recovery begins, but it is not recovery in any normal sense. The area is uninhabitable. The radiation levels will remain dangerous for decades. The cleanup will take generations. The survivors who were evacuated will not return. Their homes, their towns, their lives are gone. Compensation is promised, but the logistics are unclear. Where do you relocate 250,000 people? How do you rebuild infrastructure in zones that cannot be safely accessed? The questions have no good answers. The survivors are housed in temporary shelters, tents, trailers, converted schools. The conditions are grim. Privacy is non-existent. Resources are stretched. Despair settles in. The sense of permanence, the idea that this is not temporary but the new normal, takes root. Hope becomes harder to find. The global economy reels. The disruption in Europe cascades outward. Supply chains that depend on European manufacturing falter. Automakers halt production. Pharmaceutical companies delay shipments. Tech firms report shortages of components. The ripple effects reach Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Inflation accelerates. Central banks intervene, but the tools available are limited. Interest rate cuts cannot fix a supply shock. Stimulus spending cannot replace destroyed infrastructure. The markets remain volatile. Investors flee to safe assets: gold, Swiss francs, US Treasury bonds. The demand drives prices to record highs. Ordinary people, watching their savings erode, pull money from banks. The run on deposits forces institutions to impose withdrawal limits. The trust in financial systems, already fragile, cracks further. Disinformation campaigns intensify. State and non-state actors exploit the chaos. Fake videos show NATO troops committing atrocities. Fabricated documents claim secret plans for further escalation. Deepfake audio of world leaders spreads online. The goal is not to convince, but to confuse, to make every source suspect, to ensure that truth cannot be distinguished from lies. And it works. People stop trusting official statements. They stop trusting media. They stop trusting each other. The fracture is not just political, it is epistemic. The shared reality that holds societies together dissolves. By the end of the first week, the immediate crisis has not ended. It has evolved. The blast is history. The fallout is ongoing. The response is still forming. The death toll is in the tens of thousands and rising. The displaced number in the millions. The economic damage is measured in trillions. But the deeper wound is harder to quantify. It is the loss of the illusion. The belief that nuclear war was impossible, that deterrence was absolute, that civilization was stable. That belief is gone. And in its place is a new awareness, that everything can collapse, that the systems we depend on are fragile, that survival is not guaranteed. The survivors adapt. They learn new skills: how to purify water, how to ration food, how to navigate without GPS, how to communicate without phones, how to trust when trust is dangerous. The adaptation is not triumphant. It is grim. It is mechanical. It is what is required. Communities form around necessity, shared resources, shared labor, shared risk. The bonds that emerge are strong but brittle. They are forged in crisis, and they fracture under pressure. The cooperation is transactional. Help today in exchange for help tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes and the help is not returned, the alliance ends. In the capitals, the conversation shifts. No longer about immediate response, but long-term strategy. How to prevent the next strike. How to rebuild. How to manage a continent where a nuclear weapon has been used. The answers are inadequate. The options are limited. The consensus is absent. The alliance holds, but the cracks are visible. Some members demand aggressive posture. Others urge restraint. The divide is not just political. It is existential. The question is whether deterrence can be restored, or whether the taboo, once broken, can ever be rebuilt. The truth settles slowly. The weapon that detonated over Poland was not the beginning of a plan. It was the end of a miscalculation, a sequence of errors, misreads, and pressure that no one intended but everyone contributed to. The realization does not bring comfort, because if it can happen once by accident, it can happen again. The systems designed to prevent it, the protocols, the checks, the balances, all of them failed. And the failure was not dramatic, it was bureaucratic, it was human, and it was inevitable. What remains is not the world as it was. It is a world where the unthinkable has been thought, where the impossible has been done, where the line that was never supposed to be crossed has been erased. The survivors carry the knowledge forward. They tell their children. They record their testimony. They build monuments to the dead, but the monuments cannot undo what was done. The dead cannot be returned. The cities cannot be rebuilt in the same place. The trust cannot be restored by declaration. What remains is the awareness that safety was always conditional, that civilization is always temporary, that the systems we built to protect us are only as strong as the people who operate them, and the people, as it turns out, are fallible.